Hi, and welcome everybody to this discussion. It's really exciting for me to be here. I'm really happy to welcome you all. My name is Maeve. I was a co-founder of Rethinking Economics, which is a student-led movement to reform economics education, and I'm a pupil of John O'Neill's, and I was really flattered when he asked me to come and chair this session, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to be considering the impact of COVID and on an ecological economy, obviously, and thinking about it through the lens of class and livelihood. So we're going to be looking at how production in particular, and how it can be redirected in a more democratic way. We've got some incredible speakers today that are going to talk about, firstly, in the present context, the occupied factory in Milan, the RimaFlow factory, before moving on to talk about the Lucas plan. So without much further ado, I'm going to pass you on to Mario Pensera. He's currently employed as an assistant professor at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and his work focuses on responsible research and innovation. He's a former engineer, and he's particularly interested in how technology shapes power structures and how technology can be used to create a more just organisation of society. And he's going to discuss the RimaFlow factory, or introduce a video that we've made about the RimaFlow factory. Just to let you know, the interview that we're going to watch from RimaFlow is in Italian. So our colleague Valeria is going to interject at times through the video and translate for us. So yes, I'm just going to hand you over to Mario now, and he will go into more depth.
Hello, hi, good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the session and to have the opportunity to speak with the Lucas Plan people as well. So I will be very short. This is my idea is to give just a short introduction of what RimaFlow is and what is the main points of interviewing. So the main content of the interview that we did last week. So what is RimaFlow? RimaFlow for me is a classical example of the disruption of a production unit that was pretty much efficient, actually. So you have a model that is quite common. So you have a company that is doing more or less well. In the case of RimaFlow, RimaFlow is the new name of the occupied factory. The original name was Maflow, which was a company that produced car components for big manufacturing like Mercedes, like Fiat, etc. in northern Italy, in Milan. So you have this company that is doing more or less well, so it's productive. There is a lot of know-how in the factory, so the very skilled workers that are able to produce like high quality components and mechanical part. And then you have a process of internationalization. So the company goes bigger and bigger. So they have they open factory all around the globe. And with internationalization, the financial part, so the financial component becomes dominant, as happened in many other cases. So in order to meet the need of the shareholders, the production is stopped, and the process of restructuring is invoked. Of course, you can find all the classical, the cliche, that the factory is not productive. We need to increase profits. So they start the process of relocation. They start looking for potential other company that can acquire and then split the company in different departments that can be sold separately. So you have a quite classical model of relocation. Of course, in the case of the Maflow, the company board encounters a very strong opposition and resistance from the workers. So I don't want to enter into all the details and also the legal struggle that the workers went through. The important things to know is that at a certain point, the company and the factory in Milan is sold to a Polish entrepreneurs that promise to start a new industrial plant. This never happened. What's happened is that the Polish entrepreneurs and the company that this guy was leading basically remove all the equipments and all the machinery, the machines that the worker used to use to produce these car components, and ship them abroad. So that the factory basically virtually remain almost empty. And this is when the worker decide to occupy it with the help of a surrounding environment of activists, people from local leftist political parties and civil society organization. So the interview that you will see in a moment is a general overview of the history of the MAFLO that was relabeled as a MAFLO. Is for in Italian we use for example, recycling is like RE in English, no? Recycling, redoing, reframing the idea of the factory itself. So at the moment, the factory is a place that is empty in terms of machinery, so that they are not producing what they used to produce 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but it's a space in which different initiatives can grow. So they have a number of activities like a production of food processing, or they produce a specific vodka, antiseptic vodka, for example. They produce a specific liquor, spirits, and they host other activities, other productive activities. So this is a very short introduction. We can I hope that we can have the opportunity to answer some questions or start the debates about this example. And my last comment is that this is not an isolated case in Italy, especially in northern Italy and central Italy. We have a long tradition of cooperatives and cooperative and self-managed organization with alternative fortune. And some of them are still the democracy is still in the core of the organization. Some other, like the big cooperatives, especially in the region of Emilia-Romagna, have drifted away from their original democratic organization. But this is nothing new in Italy. So especially in the northern productive region, there are many cases similar that can be compared to the case of RIMAFLO. So I'll leave the floor to Luca Federici, who is the representative of RIMAFLO, and the interview. I don't know how you're going to show the interview. I think it's a YouTube link or a video.
Assieme al territorio, trovare una risposta alla nostra esigenza di reddito, al nostro bisogno di reddito. Importante considerare che per lavoratori e lavoratrici che fanno questa esperienza di autogestione, che decidono di entrare a occupare, c'erano pochissimi che avevano impostazione politica, di militanza. La maggior parte delle persone erano persone che erano non politicizzate, che avevano votato Berlusconi, che erano stati delusi dalla Lega, che erano stati delusi da tutta un po' la politica. Ma non c'era un sentimento antipolitico, c'era la volontà di riportare con la nostra azione, di far rivivere una politica che nascesse dal basso, che fosse in grado di rispondere alle esigenze delle persone. Allo stesso tempo si svolgevano delle azioni economiche, di lavoro, volte alla risposta dei propri bisogni. Quindi, diciamo, si è sviluppato anche qui un processo di acquisizione delle competenze per lavorare in autogestione. Si facevano assemblee all'inizio tutti i giorni. Noi abbiamo l'assemblea dei lavoratori e lavoratrici, è sovrana. No? Oggi siamo una cooperativa, ovviamente ci siamo evoluti, abbiamo utilizzato anche delle forme giuridiche per poter stare dentro il mercato, ma l'assemblea di chi lavora è sovrana e inizialmente facevamo assemblee informali, non quella della cooperativa. Oggi abbiamo una cooperativa, abbiamo anche degli obblighi, no? Di fare almeno un'assemblea all'anno, di avere un CDA, di avere tutta una serie di aspetti formali, ma all'inizio facevamo delle assemblee, prima ancora di essere cooperativa, prima ancora di costituire, all'inizio abbiamo costituito un'associazione, poi una cooperativa, poi prima ancora facevamo delle assemblee tutti i giorni in cui ci si decideva che il da fare, si confrontava su come poter portare avanti il recupero dell'azienda e il recupero del lavoro. E quindi abbiamo aperto al territorio, abbiamo deciso di provare a fare, non potendo più fare metalmeccanica, non avendo macchinari, i macchinari ci sarebbero serviti all'epoca per poter provare a fare altre cose, magari non i tubi per il condizionamento delle autovetture, ma magari qualcos'altro, o come capitale da vendere e per poi reinvestire in altre cose. Noi li abbiamo avuti, quindi abbiamo dovuto investire esclusivamente il nostro lavoro. Noi abbiamo investito il nostro tempo e il nostro lavoro, perché è quello che crea la ricchezza e non il denaro, come invece ci vogliono far credere. Il denaro è solamente un mezzo, è il lavoro delle persone che poi crea la ricchezza e il valore, no? E quindi abbiamo deciso di investire questa cosa qua, mettendo a disposizione la fabbrica. Erano 30.000 metri vuoti e facendo manutenzione poi di quello, come già dicevo, si allagavano i tetti, e quindi abbiamo iniziato a prenderci cura della fabbrica. E queste sono state le prime azioni. All'inizio abbiamo fatto un mercatino dell'usato, abbiamo fatto tutta una serie, abbiamo fatto delle produzioni alimentari, no? Che poi oggi si sono trasformate in produzioni alcoliche. All'inizio facevamo la passata di pomodoro, abbiamo fatto tutta una serie di cose. Poi oggi siamo in una rete di altre esperienze di produzione simili alla nostra, la rete si chiama Fuori Mercato. Oggi la passata di pomodoro non la facciamo più perché la fanno delle esperienze pugliesi, e quindi si fa una sorta anche di pianificazione per far sì che tutte le realtà della rete riescano a poi avere una sostenibilità economica. Noi facciamo gli alcolici, ma facciamo molto altro. Oggi abbiamo un capannone in cui abbiamo delle attività artigianali, che è stata un po' l'evoluzione dal mercatino dell'usato. Oggi abbiamo un capannone in cui ci sono dei box, in cui ci sono degli artigiani che non erano lavoratori, che si sono aggiunti dopo al progetto, e quindi abbiamo allargato il progetto. Chiaramente questa nuova dimensione non ci permette di avere un'assemblea giornaliera. Man mano ci siamo strutturati per diciamo, fare assemblee meno frequentemente. Fino a poco tempo fa si faceva un'assemblea al mese, e oggi siamo in una fase di transizione, perché abbiamo tantissime attività. Abbiamo una mensa, abbiamo la produzione degli alcolici, abbiamo delle attività di logistica, abbiamo appunto delle attività artigianali, e quindi l'idea, anche se non è un'idea ad oggi, è qua su cui stiamo discutendo, l'idea è quella di costituire un coordinamento di delegati dei singoli gruppi di lavoro. No? Il gruppo di lavoro si auto-organizza, perché l'idea è il potere è nel lavoro. Chi lavora deve poter decidere chiaramente in maniera sinergica e coordinata con tutti, perché comunque il nostro progetto di recupero ha un'identità e una direzione politica che ci viene data dal percorso che è stato fatto, dal percorso vertenziale che ci ha portato a essere quello che siamo noi oggi. E anche perché il rischio di trasformarci come una delle tante, in Italia il movimento cooperativo è sempre stato molto forte, però oggi in Italia meccanismi di sfruttamento del lavoro più esacerbati sono all'interno delle cooperative. Allora questo è un segnale, non è perché c'è qualche mente malefica che pensa di costruire una cooperativa e poi dopo la trasforma, perché si è in un sistema che probabilmente ti porta verso questa cosa qua, porta a stravolgerti le tue, e allora è necessario dotarsi dei contrappesi. E quindi oggi siamo in una fase un po' di transizione, cioè da una logica assembleare in cui tutti c'eravamo, no? E in una logica in cui ci sono i gruppi di lavoro che sono padroni del loro lavoro, autogestiscono il lavoro, delegano delle persone che costituiscono un coordinamento delle attività che prova da una parte a ottenere una sostenibilità economica del progetto, ma dall'altra a mantenere la direzione politica. Questa cosa è, come dicevo, ancora una cosa che stiamo andando verso questa direzione, non è ancora compiuta, siamo in una fase ancora embrionale di questa cosa, c'è ancora chi dice no, dobbiamo fare l'assemblea, abbiamo bisogno di un coordinatore unico, una sorta di direttore generale, e personalmente io ritengo che questa cosa possa essere, diciamo, foriera di rischi, perché quando poi si dà a un'unica persona che abbia il compito di di tenere insieme tutti i tasselli, si possono creare diciamo, delle distorsioni. Questo però è una mia opinione personale. Il gruppo, la linea un po' maggioritaria, diciamo così, anche se noi non votiamo mai, noi andiamo verso più la ricerca del consenso. Abbiamo votato chiaramente qualche volta in questi 7 anni perché non si riusciva ad arrivare a una definizione, ma veramente si contano sulla punta delle dita di una mano. Stiamo andando verso quella direzione, però chiaramente non siamo ancora tutti convinti di questa cosa, perché chiaramente abbiamo un percorso, no? E fino a prima avevamo una dinamica, oggi stiamo imparando, non siamo, cioè, pensare che è sufficiente fare un'assemblea al giorno, un'assemblea mensile per avere un livello di democrazia accettabile, dalla nostra esperienza non è così. Ecco. La democrazia va ricercata, i livelli di partecipazione vanno ricercati. All'inizio le persone non parlavano, ancora oggi, dopo 7 anni, si fa ancora fatica spesso ad avere una vera discussione, perché viviamo in una società che è patriarcale, una società che è razzista, cioè, e noi non siamo sulla Luna, noi abbiamo introiettato tutta una serie di meccanismi sociali.
Yeah, hi, thanks Ale for stopping the video. I'm Valeria and I will provide a short summary in English of the content of the interview. So we have selected 3 different parts of the interview, but the full interview with the translation will be available on YouTube. So if you are interested to have a look later on, you will have the link. So Mario asked how RIMAflow is now organized and how the decision process is taking place. And Luca explained that when they started the RIMAflow experience, they didn't have the ability and the technical infrastructure to rebuild the production process that they had before, because they just have basically an empty building. So what they decided to do was to invest on work that for them is what really generates value. So it's not at the capital, but it's at the work of people. So for that reason, they decided to invest on the local need and on the local abilities. So they developed a set of activities, for example, related to food production, second-hand market, and handmade product. And the main idea is to provide a space and a social infrastructure supporting the abilities and the working possibility of people. So after an initial settling down period, how it works is that the people that start working in RIMAflow, they start to contribute to the running expenses such as electricity and water, and also to contribute in a sort of collaborative way to the management of the building infrastructure. And inside RIMAflow, the decision process has evolved over time, because initially it was a quite of a small reality. So they had a meeting almost every day. But when they expanded, this was not clearly possible. So they had a sort of constant revision of the management process. And now there is a big discussion of how to do it better. And they are kind of arriving to a system where they are organizing a group based on the different working activity that they have, that they kind of self-coordinate themselves in line with the general approach of RIMAflow. But this is still like a sort of learning process that they have. And what they are trying to do is always to use a democratic approach. So they try to involve on compromise and debate more than on vote. They had some times where they had to arrive to a final vote instead of a compromise, but it's really like probably less than 10 times. So what happened is that they try to have a democratic process when they meet together and they discuss, and they arrive to a compromise between all the different people and reality working in RIMAflow. Alex, do you mind to show the second part of the video, please?
E volenti o nolenti li portiamo anche in fabbrica, tematizziamo certe cose, cioè la questione di genere, la questione, quindi le donne hanno più difficoltà magari a esprimersi, no? In assemblea, perché magari sono delle persone che hanno più polso, hanno, no? o comunque da sempre hanno avuto una funzione un pochino più lideristica, carismatica, e quindi fa un po' da sé che siano queste a dover poi prendere la decisione. Invece il tentativo è quello di provare a creare meccanismi di coinvolgimento, ma non sono dati, vanno costruiti, vanno tematizzati. La questione, cioè i ragazzi che lavorano con noi, Abdullah che viene dal Senegal, Ibra che viene dal Ghana, è chiaro che hanno più difficoltà di altre persone a parlare in italiano e quindi a esprimersi, no? E quindi magari se hanno un pensiero che magari non è proprio qualcosa di cui sono fermamente convinti, ma hanno un'idea, ok, sono più resti magari a intervenire perché fanno fatica rispetto a uno come me che parla, no? Io generalmente vado a fare le presentazioni, quindi diciamo, no? un eloquio, parlo molto, anche a proposito. Ma...
Come avete risolto? Cioè, come state cercando di risolvere?
Niente, proviamo, cioè si costruisce, si tematizza, fa che un po' la nostra condizione di povertà, per quanto riguarda le banche, ci ha dato una risposta lei, cioè nessuna banca ci avrebbe mai fatto credito in occupazione, non avevamo soldi da investire perché il TFR non l'abbiamo investito per non renderci ricattabili e quindi abbiamo fatto tutto con il nostro lavoro. Non abbiamo mai aperto una seria discussione sull'accesso alla tecnologia. In Argentina, come già dicevo, sì, perché ci sono più di 300 imprese recuperate, ed è tanto tempo, quindi sono radicate nell'economia e nei territori. E allora è chiaro che poi dopo, parlando, poi...
Yeah, so this second part of the video is focused on the discussion about democracy. So Mario asked what they learn in practical terms from this experience. How do they manage democracy internally? And Luca explained that democracy is something that needs to be built with discussion and compromise. So it's something that is evolving with their experience. So the main problem that they have is that sometimes you have people that are really confident and they speak for other, and it might be quite difficult to involve some categories of people, like, for example, women or people that are not Italians. They, for example, work with people from Senegal or Ghana, so for them it's more difficult to speak Italian or to express their opinion. And there are also kind of cultural difference of how to express themselves with their political and working ideas. So what they try to do is to develop some kind of socio-political and economic debate that are not just focused on work, but they are much more enlarged in a way that all the people can try to say something and try to express their opinion. So it's a sort of constant process that don't involve just the working activity, but that involve much more the idea on society in a much more larger terms. So try to combine different socio-political and economic elements. An example of that is, for example, that they develop a spirit that is called Amaro Partigiano, that is an alcoholic drink that the name want kind of to highlight the importance of the historical anti-fascist movement that exists in Italy. And I think that is particularly important today, given the fact that there is an increasing socio-political rising of racism. So they try to combine these working related activity with socio-political and economic discussion in order to involve everyone in the debate that is taking place inside the experience. And Alex, do you mind to send the last part of the video, please?
Ultima domanda, diciamo per il panel di Manchester. Cosa può insegnare la vostra esperienza nella situazione che stiamo vivendo con il Covid? Perché io so che lavorate con il carcere, fabbricando mascherine. Come pensi il paradigma della fabbrica democratica legata al territorio si possa innestare in questa nuova realtà, nuova normalità? E se ci racconti brevemente, brevissimamente, come è nata questa iniziativa delle mascherine?
Non solo le mascherine, ma quando siamo andati in lockdown abbiamo deciso di chiudere le attività lavorative per conservare e comunque di mettere a disposizione di chi volesse la fabbrica per rispondere in maniera solidale alle problematiche del territorio, quindi produzione di mascherine, ma non solo, distribuzione alimentare. Come già dicevo, noi siamo dentro una rete che si chiama Fuori Mercato, che mette assieme piccoli produttori con chi distribuisce e con i consumatori, per democraticamente definire il soddisfacimento dei nostri bisogni. E quindi durante il lockdown la solidarietà è stata la risposta che abbiamo dato noi come fabbrica. Noi non so se Remaflo possa insegnare qualcosa, ma senz'altro posso dire che i meccanismi di solidarietà sono quelli che fin da subito hanno permesso a lavoratori e lavoratrici espulsi dal mondo del lavoro di farsi un reddito, di stare a galla, di riacquistare una dignità che gli era stata sottratta in nome del profitto. E quindi volgere le proprie forze alla solidarietà, alla cooperazione, alla collaborazione è stato il meccanismo vincente. No? Quindi ecco, quello che mi sento di dire è quando c'è un problema, di non chiudersi e dare la colpa a chi sta peggio di noi, ma di aprirsi, andare a cercare le persone che hanno altri problemi simili o ben peggiori dei nostri e assieme provare a risolverli, no? Sia da un punto di vista economico, ma anche da un punto di vista sociale. Un po' è stato quello, le mascherine è venuto un po' da sé, le cose, è venuta la possibilità, che è un'associazione che si chiama Catene Movimento, che produce abiti anche di bellissima fattura, di chiedere a loro di aiutarci nella produzione delle mascherine. Ma come dicevo, non sono solo le mascherine, è proprio una logica, un sistema di come si affrontano i problemi. Quindi ci mettiamo assieme e cooperiamo e collaboriamo, non in modo competitivo, ma in modo collaborativo, alla risposta dei nostri bisogni. Io credo che sia questo l'elemento di rottura, no? Una società iperautomatizzata, una società in cui quello che si associa, quello che si, diciamo, che si sente, che passa è devi competere per emergere, perché in questo modo starai meglio tu e poi se tutti lo fanno, se no la competizione genera macerie, genera povertà. Invece noi è proprio un'altra cosa, se c'è un problema bisogna provare tutti assieme a trovare un modo per risolverlo e per starci dentro tutti, non per escludere. E questo io credo che sia non un insegnamento, ma diciamo una consapevolezza che abbiamo, ecco, che possiamo dire e passare alle persone. Quando si tratta di fabbriche recuperate è difficile individuare dei modelli, no? Dei manuali per cui si debbano seguire delle linee, perché ogni situazione ha le sue peculiarità. Però ci sono delle idee di fondo, delle direzioni che si possono prendere e possono essere, diciamo, che possono portare a risultati incredibili. Noi siamo partiti rompendo lucchetti, entrando in una fabbrica abbandonata e nessuno, tutti si pensava che ci avrebbero buttato fuori da lì a qualche giorno, e 7 anni che lavoriamo in autogestione, abbiamo vinto una delle più grandi banche europee, perché Unicredit ha una dimensione internazionale, che ci ha riconosciuto, dopo 6 anni di occupazione, proprio l'attività di manutenzione e cura dei suoi immobili, ci ha riconosciuto 300.000 euro, no? E questo ci ha permesso di acquistare i capannoni. Oggi noi non è facile, è difficile per tutti, specialmente dopo il Covid. Ci muoviamo in economia di mercato, quindi dobbiamo confrontarci con un mercato, diciamo, in questa fase di capitalismo avanzato per l'Italia, un mercato saturo, quindi con molte difficoltà, però forti l'esperienza che ci ha portato fino a qui, ovvero la solidarietà, la cooperazione e l'idea di provare a rispondere ai nostri bisogni prefigurando delle alternative di società, prefigurando un mondo migliore di quello che è oggi.
Va bene Luca, grazie mille. Io
grazie a voi.
Chiuderei qui la registrazione. Aspetta.
Okay, so the last question was focused on the COVID crisis. So to try to understand how they reacted to the COVID lockdown and how their experience can be used to manage the post-COVID crisis. So Luca explained that when the lockdown in Italy started, they had to shut down the production activities, but they decided to free up the spaces for the essential production, for example, the face mask production, or to focus on activities that are oriented to satisfy the local need of the population, for example, food production and distribution. They are historically involved in a network that is called Outside Market, that is devoted to connect producer and consumer in a more democratic and participatory way. So this kind of network existed also the lockdown crisis, and it really helped the society. So what Luca basically said that this experience have mainly highlighted the importance of solidarity and cooperation, particularly in time of crisis. It's something that they always invested on that, but during the COVID, they really understand that is the main point that will need to be considered by socioeconomic activities. So for them, solidarity and cooperation has been the driving element of their experience, and the advice in times of crisis or in times of problem to look for people with similar challenges and to try to address the problem in a social and coordinated way instead of in a competitive one. So he explained that they still obviously operate in a market economy, so they have to face about all the economic implication of the COVID crisis. But for them, the cooperation and the solidarity between the local population and the production activities has been the main element that help and that is helping them during this crisis. So as I said, this video is available on YouTube. So if you want to have a look of the full video with the translation, you will have a link at the end of the conference. I will give you the floor now.
I think there is a question from Caitlin.
Yeah, so I'll just introduce the question from Caitlin. So is there a way you can give us an idea of the scale of production? So she says it sounds a little like a more productive makerspace. And are there major differences between RemaFlow and makerspaces, Fab Labs, etc.? And she also asked about there's localized production strategies in Canada, where I believe she is, and extreme gender differentiation is part of that. So women aren't part of the more embedded localized production communities. And is that the case with factories such as RemaFlow?
Yes, I think it's the question is very pertinent. And the main difference between the RemaFlow case and the Lucas plan is the fact that, as I mentioned at the beginning, basically all the equipment from the factory were removed. So basically we are talking about not like a proper occupied factory, but more like occupied space. So the scale of production is very variable. It really depends on the kind of artisans or small initiatives that are hosted by the RemaFlow. So you have to imagine that this is more like a space of resistance, no? As they label themselves. So what's the difference between RemaFlow and Makerspace? The Makerspace, they have, as far as I know, this is my idea of a Makerspace, is a place in which there is a specific technological components and a population of geeks, you can say, no? So there are people that have a special interest in technology and experiments with technology. This is not the case of RemaFlow. So we have a very different kind of variety of different activities that are hosted, and you have to consider that the original worker of the company that remained, most of the worker abandoned the factory and look for jobs elsewhere. So this is for answering Kathleen. And then I want to make just one point is that from academic perspective, the interesting point of RemaFlow is the fact that basically they are reimagining and reshaping and reframing a space that used to be a productive space, with a new way of production, the same old stuff that they used to produce when the factory was within the capitalist system. They're reimaging a space. And then, for example, they're using this notion of care that I think is crucial and key. And they take care of, they're taking care of the building, they're taking care of the space as well. So from academic perspective, that is I'm most interested in is what would have happened if the equipment was still there. So if the old worker that used to produce component for the car industry had the chance to reimagine a new kind of production with the same equipment. And this is a common case in many occupied factories. So they emerge in moment of crisis. So it would be interesting to see how it's possible to create a similar initiative in a situation in which there is no like this permanent crisis. So if they had all the resources, like full resources, to start a different way of production. I don't know if there are other questions or.
Yeah, there is another question now. Oh wow, my computer's frozen. The joys of technology.
Is there?
Can you see it?
I can read it for you. Is there a case study available for RimaFlow with more details? No, there is not. All the material is in Italian, and we made an effort and to do the interview, and the people involved in RimaFlow that they are not fluent in English. So there is this problem. Maybe in the future, the interview is a first step. In the future, we will try to make some material in English available.
Well, thank you so much. And Mario, I believe you're staying on the call, so he will be available for questions at the end of.
Nina is sending some material in English. So yes, you can find something in English, but it's like we are talking about very general description.
So yes, thank you so much, Mario. And I believe you're staying on the call, aren't you? So if people have more questions towards the end of the session, you'll be able to ask Mario as well.
Yes.
Great. Well, I just will introduce our next two speakers now. I'm going to introduce them together because I believe they're going to just talk straight one after the other. So first is Mike Cooney. And he started employment at the Lucas Gas Turbine Equipment, Burnley, in 1966 and became a shop steward in 1969. He was elected senior shop steward for the Amalgamated Engineering Union. Following the formation of Lucas Aerospace in the early 70s, the manual and staff unions formed a National Combined Shop Stewards Committee, which he became chairman of in 1976. And that was the same year that the National Combine developed the alternative Lucas plan that he is going to give us an introduction to in his talk. And he'll be followed directly by Phil Asquith, who is a graduate of the University of Manchester and a chartered mechanical engineer. He joined Lucas Aerospace in Burnley in 1973 and shortly afterwards became an active member of the National Lucas Aerospace Combined Shop Stewards Committee. It's a mouthful, that. And then secretary later in 1978. And yes, he's going to just talk for a few minutes as well about the story of the Lucas plan. And I'm just going to pass you directly over to Mike to do that. Once again, sorry, if you do have questions, put them in the chat. And if it's for a specific person, if it's for Mike or for Phil or for Mario, just write their name in caps lock at the start, please. Over to you, Mike.
All right, thanks very much. Welcome, everyone. In the short time I have available, or we have available, I've been asked to answer two questions. Why did Lucas workers in the late 1960s, early 70s, find it necessary to form a combine? And how was that achieved? So those are the two questions. The short answer to the question, why form a shop stewards combine? The need to improve the deficiencies in the trade union movement's organisation, to unite all workers in the same company across different trade unions, across employment status and across geographical areas. The need to give the trade union movement's rhetoric, united we stand, substance and real meaning by organising solidarity. A longer answer would have to be in the context of the situation faced by all workers in the late 60s and the Workers' Trade Union Organisation before Lucas Aerospace was formed. It is stating the obvious, but needs to be said, that capital owns and controls the productive process and the employment relationship, seen in the form of management's right to manage, inherited from the laws of master and servant. Management have the right to determine what is produced, how it is produced, the right to hire and fire, the right to determine the terms and conditions of employment. It could be said, so I will say it, freedom and democracy ends at the factory gates. Workers' only recourse to this, the right to be a member of a trade union, and subject to management's agreement, trade unions have the right to collective bargaining. Collective bargaining was limited to negotiations on terms and conditions of employment, that is wages, hours of work and holidays, and in most instances excluded such items as sick pay and pensions, both seen as gifts of management, and most manual workers had neither. Lucas Aerospace was not established until 1971. Previous to that date, Lucas Industries, a multinational corporation's involvement in the aircraft component manufacturing, was undertaken by Lucas GTE, that was Lucas Gas Turbine Equipment, on 3 geographical areas in Birmingham, Burnley and Liverpool, and newly acquired companies based in London, Luton, Hemel Hempstead, Coventry, Wolverhampton and Bradford, all operating under their original names. To name 2, AEI Aircraft Group and English Electric Aircraft Components. The ex-English Electric workers had experienced the formation of the General Electric Company, GEC, in the early 60s. This company, created by takeovers, sales of parts not required, they being casualties of this policy, and the rationalisation programme with the subsequent loss of thousands of jobs. In 1969, Lucas started to rationalise those companies with the implication of work transfers and site closures. The shop stewards in 4 of those companies saw the need to defend their jobs and agreed to form a combined organisation. This was the beginning of the Lucas Aerospace Combined Shop Stewards Committee. It's interesting to say the formation of GEC had been brought about by the then Labour government's Industrial Reorganisation Corporation, encouraging selected firms, Lucas was one, supporting with taxpayers' money mergers and rationalisation of industrial sectors. The question arose, how would this affect Lucas Gas Turbine Equipment? To give some understanding of how Lucas Gas Turbine Equipment was structured and how the trade unions were organised, a brief explanation of the Burnley experience and how it became involved in the combine. I joined the company as a skill fitter in 1966. Burnley Gas Turbine Equipment, identified as a single unit, was in fact 5 sites in East Lancashire, employing some 2,000 technical, administrative and clerical staff, and skilled, semi-skilled, women and unskilled manual workers. I mention women because there was actually a rate, they were seen as separate. The company recognised for the purpose of collective bargaining 3 staff and 6 manual trade unions. This produced 9 bargaining units. The manual workers' conditions of employment negotiated at engineering industry level by national union officials, wages negotiated at local level by shop stewards or local officials at plant level, each union operating separately in 6 bargaining units. The staff unions had 3 bargaining units, negotiating at Lucas industry level. Excuse me. In 1967, I became one of 8 AAU shop stewards. We represented 1,000 AAU members in 1968. Attempts were made to organise collective bargaining across other Lucas GTE sites without success. We were successful in 1969-70 in achieving a joint shop stewards committee with the other 5 manual workers trade unions, replacing 6 bargaining units with 1. Lucas GTE's main business was as a subcontractor to Rolls-Royce. When that company went bankrupt in 1971, thousands of jobs were put at risk in Lucas, 1,000 in Burnley. What could we as workers do? Answer, try and make the selection for redundancies as fair as possible. This gave some urgency to making contact with other Lucas sites. As it transpired, the then Conservative government nationalised Rolls-Royce aircraft division, and the car division became owned by German companies. This was a seminal moment for the shop stewards, whether staff or manual workers, asking, what is the use of collective bargaining if you have no job? As a consequence of Rolls-Royce's aircraft division being brought under, bringing down the entire company, Lucas Industries created Lucas Aerospace and Defence Systems with its own central management in 1971. Lucas Aerospace joined the company in 1972. That same year saw the manual workers in Burnley involved in a strike that lasted 3 months and was supported by the combine sites, who refused to accept work transfers and gave financial support, raising over £10,000. That dispute with that support was brought to a successful conclusion. The unforeseen circumstances for management, that success gave the combine a real sense of unity. Burnley became the combine's most enthusiastic supporter, and sites still not members joined in 1973, bringing all 13 sites together. Lucas Aerospace management was still intent on rationalising the company, and between 1970 and 74, the workforce was reduced from 18,000 to 13,000. In 1972, the combine formed a pension advisory committee with the intentions of pushing pensions into the collective bargaining process. In 1974 saw the election of a Labour government who were looking to take over the aircraft into public ownership. That same year, the combine achieved a first. A government minister at the Department of Industry, Tony Benn, agreed to meet the combine. A government minister meeting rank and file trade union members was unheard of. It was outside all conventions. A disapproving civil service, disapproving national union officials, and a nervous Lucas management. Although not realised at the time, that meeting put the combine on a road that would challenge management's right to determine what was produced, giving an alternative to redundancies. The outcome was the Lucas Aerospace Shop Stewards Corporate Plan. It is a mouthful, by the way. Corporate Plan. An answer to recession and redundancies, which will be explained by my friend and colleague, Phil Asquith. Before handing over to Phil, I feel it necessary to say, good design, whether of products or organisations, requires good designers. In Lucas Aerospace, we were lucky to have 2 of the very best. Mike Cooley, and notice it's Cooley, not Cooney, and Ernie Scarborough. The combine owed its existence to Mike and Ernie and a group of shop stewards supported by 13,000 Lucas Aerospace workers. Without the combine, there would not have been a corporate plan. I could say much more, but I will now hand over to Phil.
Thanks, Mick. Excellent. Well, greetings everyone. My name's Phil Asquith and I succeeded Mick as chairman of the Lucas Aerospace Combined Shop Stewards Committee at the Burnley plant, which at that time employed 3,500 of the 15,000 Lucas Aerospace workers in the UK. So both of us have actually been involved with the Lucas plan since its inception, and in Mick's case a long time before that, as he's already said. When we launched the plan in 1976, none of us ever dreamt that we would be speaking about it at conferences over 40 years later, 45 years now. The renaissance has been driven by the new Lucas Plan Working Group, details of which are on lucasplan.org.uk. I'm sure the reason the plan has maintained its currency is that the problems that we were addressing in the 70s are essentially, with the exception of COVID, obviously, the same problems which confront us today, only writ larger and so much more urgent. Excuse me. So we're here today to discuss alternative systems of production to meet human needs and how workers and community plans are created. I've been asked to address briefly how the Combine tackled these issues in the 70s by compiling the Alternative Workers Corporate Plan for Conversion, now called Repurposing, from military to socially useful production. And trying to cram 45 years worth of adventures into a few minutes is a bit like saying Tolstoy's War and Peace was about Russians. Copyright Woody Allen. Today, the main driver for repurposing is COVID. In the 70s, the drivers, as Mick was saying, was high unemployment, the energy and impending environment crisis, which we referred to then as thermal pollution in the corporate plan, dehumanisation of the design and production process, and the massive defence cuts which were promised in Labour's manifesto. The Combine looked at all sorts of strategies to combat these problems, ranging from sit-ins, factory takeovers, occupations, all those were going on at the time, and possibly nationalisation. But none of those strategies seemed sustainable and appropriate for our situation. So after the meeting that Mick referred to with Tony Benn, when he was Secretary of State in November '74, his suggestion of an alternative plan based on an audit of our members' skills and our facilities and what we might make instead really set the ball rolling. The Combine decided to draw up an alternative to the company's corporate plan independently. We thought that if defence workers' skills, were no longer required to make weapons, they should be used to benefit society. This was consistent with decades of Labour Party and trade union policy, but no one had ever planned the nuts and bolts of the conversion process. They'd talked about it, but not got down to anywhere near the detail required. So we decided to embark upon a plan to save jobs by making products to fulfil the unmet needs of society. Products to be measured by their use value, not their exchange value. And we encouraged our members to appreciate their dual role as consumers and producers in society. As consumers, they had a free choice, but suddenly as producers, they didn't. We felt that there should be some choice or at least influence on what our members actually made day to day. We also wanted to democratize technology and to use it to liberate people rather than to enslave them on production lines and the like. So we knew that we were about to embark into uncharted waters. There were no union manuals, no training courses or anything. But because the Combine and our trade unions were democratic, we took the proposal to put this strategy together to our members at mass meetings. You younger people have probably seen it in black and white films now. I can often remember Mick saying, all those in favour, and the hands used to go up most of the time. So the members endorsed this strategy and we set to work about drawing up the plan. And my original thought then was, who heck, what have we let ourselves in for? The first thing that Ernest Scarborough did was to write about, I think it was 180 letters to, no offence intended here, academics, researchers, politicians, people who talked about conversion for a long time and we got 3 replies out of the 180 from Dave Elliott, Richard Fletcher, and Professor Tring, who were mega helpful to us during that process, because we felt, as our members paid for the university through their taxes, we should have a call on the skills and knowledge inside universities, and not just the companies which do that. And indeed, we actually raised funding and set up 2 such centres to be able to access resources for us, CATES and UDAP. But that's a different story. So we did what we should have done in the first place, and we compiled from the Combine executive a questionnaire. And we sent it around all the sites and asked the members in the Shop Stewards Committee to audit their machinery, their skills, and what they might make if defence weapons went out of the window tomorrow. It took about a year, and it sounds easy to say it in a few minutes, but it was bloody hard work, wasn't it? It was hard work. But then we found that people started coming out with their pet projects, which management had crushed years ago. And there was this outpouring of creativity and ideas, which resulted in dozens of product ideas. Now, we've never claimed that these were invented by our people at Lucas Aerospace, but they were products, some of which have been around for a long time, but had never actually been picked up and fully developed. So we sifted all the product suggestions into 6 areas, which included renewables, energy conservation, medical technology, transport technology, and teleshuric devices, which is basically Greek for hands at a distance, doing hazardous jobs, but whilst in a safe environment, like coal mining, North Sea, and so on. Examples of the products, would you believe, this is 1976, were hybrid car engines, a road rail vehicle, you can see them all over the place now, electric cars, wind turbines, solar technology, fuel cells, heat pumps, microprocessors, which we now call chips. I make that point particularly because Lucas were very reluctant to leave hydromechanical fuel systems. A lot of them felt there was no future in electronics, and our colleagues at York Road fought a battle over that particular point. So when we put our proposals to the management, the corporate plan, I have their reply here. It's only one of the few in existence, so we might publish it one day. But we decided to be kind and not embarrass them, but I will now, if they're still alive. And as far as wind power is concerned, quote, large general duty wind turbines are not seen as appropriate to the UK, was part of their official reply. And of course, later on, they rejected the plan out of hand. As we worked on the plan as workers in a high technology industry, we became more and more aware of the contradictions of the technology in our supposedly advanced technological society. We became more aware of what technology could provide and what the system under which we operated allowed it to provide. For example, in our factory, we made the hot end of the Olympus engines for Concorde, but yet thousands of old age pensioners were dying each year for the want of a simple heating system. In the International Year of the Disabled, which I think from memory was 1977, we were able to watch astronauts float about effortlessly in space through filtered television pictures. But then disabled people were still struggling along the streets in more or less the same way that they did in medieval times. So someone somewhere was making the decision as to where technology should be placed, where it should be developed, and who's in and in their interest too. Another example was that the Kidney Patient Sufferers Association told us that 3,000 people were dying each year for want of a kidney machine. And believe it or not, Lucas Aerospace at G&E Bradley's in London actually made kidney machines, and we wanted to develop them into portable devices. But Lucas said to us straight out, it was far more profitable for them to make military equipment than kidney machines, which was a really interesting point if you analyse it, because who pays for kidney machines? The taxpayer. Who pays for military equipment? The taxpayer. So there's a purely political definition of profit taking place there. So The other disparaging thing that the management said about the reply about the plan was it seemed to be within the realm of the brown bread and sandals brigade. And for those of you who are younger than us, that was the term used to describe hippies in the 60s. But of course, all those technologies that were in the plan, or most of them, are now every day. So our members' technological forecasting was spot on, and the academics who helped us greatly. And I thought that was a ringing endorsement of the bottom-up approach. One spin-off thing from the corporate plan, there were many, was it provided first time concrete alternatives to arms production, as I've already said. So internationally, we were able to start arguing for the removal of the jobs from the disarmament debate, because you'll know as well as I do, it's a good example, is that if there's a threat to cancel a weapons project, the whole media circus is about the loss of jobs. It's not about whether you actually need the project or not for needs on grounds of national security. And the international peace movement embraced the plan so enthusiastically. We even were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for the work on alternatives to arms production. But the plan wasn't just about products. The plan also challenged the way products are designed and produced in a tailoristic way, where skill and creativity are designed out of the production process. We proposed within the plan a reversal to this, to human-centered production systems to develop skill, creativity, ingenuity, and tacit knowledge of our members. The antithesis, we would say, of retraining. One of our members said disparagingly, training is for dogs. You program a robot, but you actually educate a human being. So it was axiomatic that we were challenging the misuse and abuse of science and technology. The answer given, their use is directed and for too long away from the socially useful economy. The plan also challenged design for obsolescence, products designed to wear out prematurely, fueling a throwaway economy with all of the wastage of the planet's resources that engenders. It was clear even in the 70s that a world economy based on endless growth could not be sustained by the Earth. What was the international reaction to the plan? It was overwhelming and completely positive. And Combine reps have spoken at hundreds of meetings and conferences over the years in the UK, Scandinavia, Europe, mixed being to Australia and America. Surprisingly, and I'm going to finish very soon, the management press came out in our support, and it says it demonstrates clearly, this is industrial management, July 76, that if managers don't carry out their jobs to the satisfaction of workers, then those same workers have the capability and know how to do it for them. So we got universal support with one notable Canute-like exception, which was our side, the responsible national trade union officials and Labour government, who were fearful of grassroots trade union activism at the time. Now that's another story, which I'm going to skip because I've got my eye on the clock. But I'd like to finish with the concluding paragraph of our dear friend and comrade Mike Cooley's address to the Right Livelihood Foundation in Stockholm when he received the prize on behalf of the Combine. And this sums it up about technology, as far as I'm concerned. Technology is not given. It's not like the sun or the moon or the stars. It was made by people like us. And if it's not doing for us what we want, we have a right and responsibility to change it. The future's not out there like space waiting to be discovered. The future has to be built by people like you and I. And we do have real choices. It can be a future in which we are not threatened with mass annihilation through nuclear weapons or ravaged with hunger. It could really be a world in which we treasure all of our people equally and get science and technology to serve people rather than the other way around. In a sentence, we could begin to perform the modern miracle. We could help to make the blind see, the lame walk, and we could feed the hungry. And I think that's the most elegant summary of why we are here together today. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you, Mick. That was incredibly inspirational and depressing in equal measure that you had all these plans ages ago and they still haven't been implemented. But yeah, thank you so much for that. We've got some questions in the chat, but I'm going to wait until after Hilary has spoken to present them to the speakers. So I'd just like to introduce our final speaker, which is Hilary Wainwright. She's a fellow of the Transnational Institute and coordinates the Transnational Institute and coordinates the European dimension of its New Politics project. She's a founder and editor of Red Pepper and an active member of the World Transformed. So she worked with the Lucas Combine in the 70s and 80s and documented their experiences and identified the problems that they face. And between 82 and 86, she worked as a Deputy Chief Economic Advisor to the Great London Council. And with Mike Cooley, Robin Murray and Mike Ward and others worked to develop the approach of popular planning for socially useful production to address the problem of unemployment and unmet needs in London. So I'm really excited to hand you over to Hilary now. Hilary, you have the floor.
Okay, so thanks very much to all of you for organising it. And first to say, I'm one of the people, one of the many, the hundreds of millions of people across the world who were inspired by the Lucas Plan, by Mike Cooley. And my battery's a bit dead. I think, well, not dead yet, but I hope it. I'll have to be brief, I think. Anyway, I wanted to sort of generalise, building on what Phil was saying, to really, I'll start with making a distinction between what I'd call militarised production and, on the other hand, socially useful production. By militarised production, I mean production that's driven by private corporations producing both for the market and for the state in terms of military production, and also organized often on the basis of a sort of highly intensive regime of control of labor in order to maximize profits. So all the points that Phil was making about Taylorism, about extracting the knowledge and particularly the tacit knowledge of the workers, and actually then using that as a form of control is key to that idea of militarized production. And on the other hand, we have socially useful production, which is characterized by both a different sort of purpose and direction of production. So production for social need, production priorities based on use, not profit. And also linked to that, as exemplified by the Lucas Plan, a kind of notion of democratic production. You could call it productive democracy, so that democracy is not just about the rights of individuals to vote, but actually about the rights of people to have control over their labor and to organize and to be collective in that control. And I think in explaining the importance of that, I think it's maybe important to recognize that even at the time of the Lucas Plan, it was very much part of a family of initiatives. So it was a kind of social phenomenon of the late 70s of alternative production. I mean, I'm now on holiday in the south of France with a friend of mine, Mary Caldor, who we worked with the workers at Vickers Armstrong, Vickers Engineering, based in Tyneside, making tanks. And then Barrow was also Vickers, making the Trident submarine. And we, particularly Mary, worked on alternative products, on military conversion, on conversion from the military to socially useful production. That was Vickers, and then also Chrysler, many other companies were thinking in the same direction. There was a kind of moment when, in a way, the old market-driven system was failing in terms of both, well, the basic picture of growing unemployment at the same time as growing unmet need. Now, that was in the 1970s, but it's now even more the case. You know, post-COVID, we're going to see a massive escalation of unemployment, but also we've become even more aware than before. More people have become aware of the unmet social needs, health needs, climate, environmental needs. And so politically, the conditions for a new wave of alternative production are very much there in terms of consciousness. The difference is that the level of organization of the trade union movement is not there. But on the other hand, it's not as defeated as sometimes we think in our most despairing moments. I mean, during the lockdown, I was sort of desperate to kind of understand what sources of hope there were. And I made contact with workers in Airbus who were actually working on the conversion of making planes to making ventilators. You know, it never got any publicity because all the publicity was dominated by the government agenda, which was, you know, making grand declarations about these household name companies, Airbus, etc. But actually, what made it possible was the organisation of workers on the ground with their safety reps being able to ensure a sterile environment for the production of ventilators. So, you know, this kind of spirit of looking for alternatives that are based on use has never died, but it keeps popping up. I mean, the chair referred to my experience with Mike Cooley at the Greater London Council. And there we developed a whole strategy for London based on this idea of socially useful production. And really important there, because I've been listening to some of the feminist thinking around alternative production, was the issue of care, was the issue of recognizing domestic labor as very much part of the economy. So our industrial strategy had a whole section on domestic labor, on socializing domestic labor in terms of childcare, laundrettes, and so on. And that also has got implications for changing working hours. So if we start our economic thinking from use value, from social need, and work back, and if we put the emphasis on production rather than just on distribution, I think we've got the makings of an alternative strategy, an alternative economic but also social strategy. I mean, at the moment, you know, the idea of political support for that is rather distant in England, at any rate. We had a brief moment with Jeremy Corbyn, who was going to, had he got into government, would create an arms conversion agency. And although that project is defeated, we mustn't give up. I mean, post-COVID, there's a new consciousness of the need for production and an economy based on social need. We had 6 months where health needs were absolutely dominant. That's, you know, the government in Britain is trying to move that back, reverse that, and put profits and the normal economy in their terms back to the fore. But we've got to hold on to that experience of mutuality, you know, when neighbours, when communities really thought about, you know, each other. And also in production, you had workers actually thinking about how they could contribute to the economy in a useful, socially useful way. And also, if you think about the health service, it coped with COVID not because of the government, but because, in spite of privatization, in spite of cuts, the workers in the health service absolutely worked together, combining, using their tacit knowledge to produce solutions to solve patients and communities' problems. So I think there are seeds of hope, and Roma Flow and all those examples need to be constantly publicized and thought about in a wider context, which is why this seminar is so important. I wish I could be fully part of it. But anyway, that's, I think, the end of my 10 minutes. Thank you. And the end of my phone almost, but I'll hang on in there.
Thank you so much, Hilary. Yeah, that was great. I'm particularly excited to hear about what you say about care and the caring industries and unpaid care work. I'm going to just abuse my position as chair, and also because, Hilary, I know that your phone battery might run out. But I wanted to ask you a question around that. And how would you advise the people working on that remobilize the stuff that there was such, for the first time in certainly my political lifetime, care was front and center of the political discussion. And yeah, I've really been disheartened to see that fade away. And I would ask for your advice on how we can sort of remobilize and recapture that momentum.
Well, I mean, I think that we can build on the experience of COVID and people's realization that care work is so central. I mean, you know, people were clapping the care workers, and a lot of that was rhetoric, but actually the fact that it got such, I mean, I remember walking out into my neighborhood on the first night of the clapping and thinking, oh, I better text my other lefty in the street just to make sure that at least there's two of us. And I walked into the street, and everywhere, you know, neighbors I never knew I had, you know, were coming out. And so there's a sort of latent identification with care workers, with care. And I think we need to build on that in terms of first campaigns against privatization and campaigns for decent pay for health workers that are argued for, not just in terms of narrow economic arguments, but also in terms of, you know, actually the usefulness and the importance of what they do. So I think we've got to make the question of meeting social need and the value of that care work for the community and for the well-being of everybody central to our day-to-day practical arguments. And I think we've got to try and persuade the unions to do the same. You know, I'm sometimes disappointed with Unison because it doesn't really build enough on people's identification with care workers. You know, people, whether they're looking after their elderly parents or their children, you know, every stage of life, you know, people are thinking about care. And that needs to be built on as a central part of trade union arguments, and not in a way that labour movements in Britain has tended to divide the social and the industrial, the social and the economic, and hand over the social to the Labour Party. But I think we've got to reclaim the social for our day-to-day economic struggles. So we never fight around wages or privatization without, or against contracting out, without raising to the fore the social value of care, including, you know, work cleaners and ancillary workers whose role in the care system is often ignored, but is crucial.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to let other people ask questions now because that was a bit cheeky of me. So questions for Mike and Phil. I've got two of them and I'm going to present them both to you. So the first one was, do you have any thoughts on whether today's trade unions are fit to help tackle today's problems? And then the second question was, what singular advantages do you see today for the imaginary repeat of the process you described, except for the obvious climate change trend? So if either Mike or Phil want to jump in on those, or also you, Hilary.
I find that a difficult question to answer. You've got to remember, I'm an old fella. I mean, I've been retired now for what, 18 years. Consequently, what's happening in the trade union movement? And I don't want to seem disparaging about this, but you've always had the official trade union movement and the rank and file trade union movement. And it gets very political. And as a consequence, well, I do find it difficult to answer. You've also got to realise that when you get to a certain age, the short-term memory lets you down. But the thing is that I don't really know what's happening. I've just seen, in fact, my son's just experienced being made redundant at Rolls-Royce. So I don't think much has changed. There's one absolute basic fact, and it's still there, that management's right to manage is the system that we operate under. And the trade union movement's right to collective bargaining is still there. Collective bargaining has been extended somewhat, mostly with the assistance of laws like Redundancy Payments Acts and things like that, Equal Pay Acts. So they've extended collective bargaining. But I don't think that the official trade union movement, it still has the rhetoric, as Phil said, it still has the rhetoric that, yes, we'll do this, we'll do that. But the rhetoric is they never look to how they're going to achieve it. And it stays at the level of rhetoric. And we have to do better. but I can't really criticise the trade union movement at the moment because I'm not really involved, and I haven't been for quite some time. Other than I have people, I represent people at employment tribunals and things, or I did, at employment tribunals and things like that. And so I still get shop stewards coming round to our house, and we talk about how to do this and how to do that. That's my only contact. So that's the best I can do.
Okay, can I do the second question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just preface that by saying the power level of trade unions now are not what they were in the 70s. The Combine was industrially very, very powerful, as were the other trade unions, but that is not the case now. Right. Is it possible to replicate or do a modern day version of the Lucas plan? We've been told for years that conversion is not possible and it'll never happen and it's pie in the sky. Everybody who's worked in industry, the companies are diversifying all the time. And there's a fairly fine line, isn't there, between diversification and conversion. Often the movement, when they're talking to defence workers, they say conversion. They say diversification because conversion's a bit more frightening. But conversion is going on all the time, for a start. Secondly, as I finished by saying, the Labour government, despite support for the Lucas workers being unanimous party policy, I was there when it went through, they ignored it. I went to a conference in Brussels last July. I was invited to speak at a conference, and it was about transition of the European coalfield regions, right? And I said there more or less what I said today. And I was astonished because it was a big, full-on European Union style conferences, booths of interpreters and all sorts of it. And what they were doing, they were hatching, they were well down the road of a 10-year conversion plan for the coalfield regions of the EU where coal was going to disappear as part of the decarbonisation strategy. Now, instead of doing what Margaret Thatcher did here, your pit's closed, bump, end of, there's a 10-year planning going on. They actually announced the programme about 6 weeks to 2 months ago, and there's a whole transition, I would call it conversion, planned. And the model they're following is the transition that took place at the coalfields in Limburg in Belgium to what's now a high-tech economy. And that's only happening in Brussels. It's an hour away by plane. And I bet no one who's listening has ever heard of it, because I'd never heard of it till I got there. We're out of it now because of Brexit, it would seem. But the plan is there for this massive conversion of the coalfield regions from how they are now to a new economy. So conversion is staring us in the face, not just there, but in different areas. There are several papers around at the moment, and I can send you the listing for circulation, that lists all sorts of mini conversion projects that are taking place all over. So I would say, that's the long answer, sorry. The short answer is, yes, it would be possible to do another Lucas style plan, but because the trade unions are so weak comparatively, we need to bolt on the wider interests of community and society in general. There was a great report brought out 2 years ago by the Nuclear Education Trust, and it examines conversion initiatives around the world, some successful, some partly, some failed, and it gives common reasons and common criteria for the success of the project. So there's a wealth of information and activity going on. It's just somehow it never seems to get through to the shop floor of our movement.
Thank you so much. Mario, have you got any thoughts on any of the questions that we just asked?
Well, I have many questions for Phil and Mike, to be honest, but I don't think this is the right moment. No, I just want to add the comments of a proposal that me and a colleague from the University of Sheffield, Professor Andrea Genovese, made in Italy, in Naples, my city, about the possibility to get inspired by the Lucas plan for the case of Whirlpool factory in Italy that is producing washing machine. So we wrote an article that we try to circulate in the local press, talking about the Lucas plan and see, look, I think you should. This is an alternative. This is an alternative to the kind of help from the state that you're asking, because the worker were asking the government to intervene and to buy the factory, or to intercede, or to mediate between different companies that were interested in buying the factory. And we proposed them to start like an assembly, or to discuss the Lucas plan, and to propose the factory a new plan in which they can produce the same washing machine for the local community, or alternative equipment. And the strongest reaction that we got was from leftist parties and the unions in Italy. They told us that we were crazy, that this is not the way that we have to do, that the worker had no capability of management, and they didn't know how to do it. They don't know the financial markets, and of course there is the problem of property, that they were not willing to accept any solution that was an alternative form of ownership of the factory. So still, I think that's the biggest enemy we have in this kind of initiative. Often are leftist party and sometimes, like in this case, the unions, and this set. So this was my only comment. If you want to know more about the Whirlpool case in Italy, you can contact me privately. But that case was very interesting, because they had the machinery, they had the equipment. It's not like Rimaflow that basically they remain with an empty space.
Thank you so much. I've got another question for Phil here. So how do you weigh out the benefits of a slow conversion that certainly benefits society against the more urgent and maybe abrupt or radical need to act to combat climate change? I'm afraid we don't have the luxury of time anymore like we did in the 80s. Oh, you're on mute, Phil.
Unmute, okay. Get back on. I wish I had the comprehensive answer to that, which I don't. But what you got to do is try. And they're doing it in Europe, as I described, as far as the coalfield's concerned. So most people have argued that conversion has to be part of a national or even international industrial strategy. I don't think there's any getting away from that. For short-term solutions, for immediate factory closures, I think people have got to look a bit wider than they would normally do. I think the trade unions can be their own worst enemies. I identify exactly with what Mario's just said, and I saw Mick smiling, because we had some within our 100-strong shop stewards committee who were against what we were doing, and they felt we should be burning down the town hall instead. Well, that would never win the vote at a mass meeting. So I have difficulty in providing a pragmatic type answer to that question that's posed, and I only wish I had an answer. But because of the short-term nature of things, I don't think it should stop us from attempting to bring about a European-style coalfield conversion strategy.
Thank you. I've run out of questions in the chat. I'm sure that people have got, oh, hang on, I've got a new message. Bear with. Oh, no, that's just a question on where it will be. This has been recorded, where it's going to end up. So has anybody else got any questions they can put in the chat for any of the speakers? Well, okay, I've got a question. Yeah, I'm not super familiar with the trade union movement. I'm from a generation where, yeah, it's been dead since I've been alive. That's the sort of narrative around it. And I was wondering how you would, again, advise people of my generation to sort of try and reinvigorate that movement and sort of build solidarity in a generation that's been fed individualism since birth? I mean, it's a big question, but has anyone got any thoughts on that? Phil, I can see you huffing.
I'll just, if I just think about it, and I say my reactions are very slow these days, that what we have, and it seems to happen in all organisations, it's things get centralised. In the 60s and 70s, shop stewards were sort of tolerated by the union officials, but not really trusted. And certainly the rank and file and the shop stewards certainly didn't trust the officials. And these were the problems. And what's happened over the years, the unions have amalgamated and got bigger, in the sense of the smaller unions have joined the larger unions and made the unions larger. And they become more centralised and controlled by the centre. I mean, for instance, the AAU shop, the Amalgamated Engineering Union shop stewards were elected by the members. The officials were elected by the members. Shop stewards are still elected by the members, but mostly now officials are appointed by the General Secretary. Now, if you're elected by your members, they're your boss, if you want to use the term. If you're appointed by the General Secretary, he's your boss, if you want to use the term. So you can see the power structure has really been taken away and put to the national officials. Okay, the executives are lay officials, but they only come together to discuss the agenda. The officials are there all the time, and that's the problem. We say the trade unions are democratic. As I say, I don't want to get too critical about this, but it's always been my observations that these are the problems that they have, and we've got to overcome them, but there's no attempt to do that. So it's an organisational problem. And it seems that human society needs to centralise itself, and you've got to get used to decentralising yourself. I mean, Britain's run from London, and we all know that London and the South East is where the prosperity is. And the regions pick up the crumbs. The same in the trade union movement. So we've got to get over this centralisation and start to come back to the grassroots levels. And that's the best I can do for this one.
No, it's really, I think, yeah, I feel that obviously as a Northerner, I feel that very strongly, the centralisation point. And I think John sent around an email with a quote in, I can't remember who it was, about ordinary people. Somebody was asking one of your colleagues, can ordinary people organise things? And he said, I've never met an ordinary person in my life. Everybody I meet is extraordinary, which I thought was wonderful. So I have another question. It's
that
how
sounds
do we
like a Mike Cooleyism, by the way.
Oh, well, there you go. It's a good one. I like it. I've used it already, like last week. Anyway, how do we collectively combat coal machinery working overtime, destroying forests and poor indigenous peoples to cater to global corporate giants in countries like ours, whilst we try to reimagine community-centric strategies? It's another tough one. Phil or Mario, have you got any thoughts on that? So how do we combat big industry basically destroying forests and indigenous people's communities? Whilst trying to reimagine it.
It's a huge question. No, I mean, I cannot answer this question in a few seconds or a few minutes. I can point to SOMA, KP, that there is this global environmental justice movements. Many people from degrowth movements, ecological economics, belong to these movements. and this is a very diverse movement. There is a lot of people working on political ecology and environmental struggle in the South, in the global South. The difference that I see is that the legal framework or the instruments that people in the South have are very different, and in many cases, the level of violence and struggle can be a completely different scale. I can imagine what's happening in Colombia, for example, or in many places in Africa, or also in Asia, experience in which workers demand simpler rights or demand different way of organizing production, and the reaction from the company and the state is very violent. Or another case that I can mention is the people's science movements, that since the 60s, they were trying to organize technology and science in general, the relationship between society, technology, and science in different way that is more democratic, is more links to the specificity of cultural specificity of many places in India, and they are still active in India. So there are struggle and movements that are active in this sense all over the world. It's impossible to give a short answer to Soma question. And then there is another question about.
I just think Phil wanted to come in on that question.
It's quicker, really, and it's often overlooked. Mick referred to the Combine and its work on pensions. At the start, the Lucas Industry Pension Fund had 7 trustees, and they were all company nominees, right? We ran a campaign, and it was led by the Combine, but it went wider than that, and we were able to get 3. They were called employee, but not trade union reps, but they really were trade union reps. We managed to get 3 of the trustees, 3 of the 7 trustees from the trade unions. And if you can't control the company or influence it by good old-fashioned industrial action, a more subtle way that has been practiced, you see it in the newspaper at shareholder meetings from time to time, is if you can organise the shareholders, and the shareholders are usually pension schemes, you can actually get at them through the back door. I'm not saying it's easy. There used to be a setup, I'm just trying to remember its name, but it was basically a trade union-based movement. Mick might know its name, I can't remember it, but they were actually trying to get trustees onto their pension funds. You get the information that you wouldn't normally get, and it was an attempt to say that we'll vote for your company to proceed in a more progressive direction if you'll do it the other way. So we were partly successful in influencing the company through the shareholders meetings by having brought about trade union representative on the pension funds. That was one thing that seemed to be quite promising in the 70s, but obviously it's never gone the whole way.
Thank you very much. I've got questions coming in thick and fast now. So I've had 2 around a similar theme. So I'm going to ask you, mainstream labour institutions and thinking, mainstream labour institutions and thinking still prioritises the volume of production rather than questions of what's to be produced and why. While recent notions of green deals go some way to reset this thinking, are they in any way sufficient? So it's, a question around, what we produce and why, which I think, Phil, again, you spoke really eloquently about, which I found fascinating. Oh, you're on mute again.
Oh, yeah. I think one of the obstacles to that is people make the simple equation that if we don't produce as it's going out of fashion, if we don't keep producing, if we reduce production and make things last longer, then what happens to our jobs? And what we used to advocate was, instead of having the high volume, resource intensive type of production and throw it away in the landfill when a screw falls out of a washing machine, you actually design for longer life, right? and then you actually upskill people so that when the product goes wrong, they have the skills to mend it. So if you think of a car, if they make cars to last longer, you need more people to repair them. So that's where the upskilling of the economy would occur, and that is the antidote to the lower number of jobs that are required by reduced throughput. There's a story about Lucas, and this is how they deliberately cause parts to fail. That the windscreen wiper motors were lasting too long. This was in the 70s when the Japanese were moving into the European industry. And so they could sell more windscreen wiper motor meters. There was this famous meeting at Great King Street where they decided to reduce the bearing surface area of the motors by 30%, so they would fail quicker. So that was the Lucas practice at the time to increase volume. And of course, what we were wanting to bring about was to go the other way. So to design for longer life, but actually to have a skills infrastructure that could do the repairs when necessary, much like when you take your car to the garage.
And Mick, did you want to come in on that as well?
Well, what I want to do, I want to jump back to the question previous to that. I mean, what we've got to look at, and it's one of my hobby horses, is and I give you two examples where the National Coal Board's pension fund sued Arthur Scargill, who was a trustee of the pension fund, because he wouldn't sign the investment portfolio. And I mean, it's a bit wrong way around this, but Scargill said that he weren't willing to sign a portfolio that invested in oil and other industries that put coal miners out of work. It was the other way around. But the important thing is that the judge says that he lost the case, did Scargill, and said he would have to sign the investment portfolio, or he would have to remove himself as a trustee. And the judge said that the trustees had a duty to maximise the income to the pension fund. Now that sends a very loud signal out. The other thing is that there are trillions of pounds that are workers' pension funds. They're probably the biggest investors at pension funds in industry. And workers have no control whatsoever as to where those funds are put. Now, I'm not saying if they had the power that they would put it where we would like them to. The question arises, if they don't have the power, they ain't going to be able to do anything about it. So where capital goes is the determination. The other thing is, and again, this is an hobby horse, we said if we live in a civilized society that we have to operate under the rule of law. That makes sense. It's believed that the law is neutral, that justice is blind. And what we've to understand, it isn't. What we have is law that is in interest. It's for interest. And the question you have to ask as a society and as a worker is, whose interest is the law passed for? Or what interest is the law made for? In whose interest is it operating? And when you start to look at those questions and find answers to those questions, then you're making some progress to forming an equitable and civilized society. And you'll be able to decide what you make and who you make it for. Now, then, these are my hobby horses. I don't want to get involved much more because time doesn't allow. But there you go. I think these are thoughts that we have to, or issues that have to be faced, and questions raised and answers given and power taken. I mean, to give the ownership of capital or to give capital to the owners of it, to let them decide how it's used, actually it's part of what the system says it's there for. But in reality, the pension funds, like the companies, are managed by professional managers. who operate in their own interests, not in the interest of society.
Thank you. Yeah.
End of sermon.
I agree. And Mario, I believe you wanted to come in as well.
Yes, my comment was more related to the other comments from Phil. I think that's of course it's very important to find a mechanism and tool to start debating at least about what to produce and how to produce, but also what to produce. And I think there is a window of opportunity in this new buzzword of the European Union, but not only European Union. Think of China, for example, policy on circular economy. And this is this idea of circular economy that we have to close the loop of production. And for now, this is still very technocratic kind of discourse. I think that we should make an effort, we as a community of ecological economists and degrowth, to try to occupy the space of the debate with an alternative vision of circular economy that takes into account the arguments of, for example, ownership, of organization of production, because the risk is that the capital and the financial system will appropriate the notion of sustainability as they are doing basically, and then will deliver a new agenda of circular economy that's basically serving the same old interest. I think there is good in this idea of circular economy, and I think this is a place in which we can situate the lesson from the Lucas plan, that are amazing lesson of struggle, with this new idea of climate change or closing the loop or making stuff that are durable and also design in a democratic way. So this is a code that where me and my colleague that I mentioned before, Professor Andrea Genovese from Sheffield, this is a battle that we start to do. And we have a project, a Marie Curie network called Retrace, in which we are training 15 PhD students on different aspects of circular economy, and I think this is a battle that is worthwhile to be fought. Okay.
Thank you. I've got a question from Sherilyn that's close to my heart. So, care work is feminized and racialized. The vast majority of paid and unpaid care work is done by women and people of colour in the UK. At least white men, in the UK, at least white men are least likely than any other group to be engaged in care jobs. Does the fact that trade unions tend to be led by white men, and do correct me if I'm wrong, who aren't generally encouraged to think of care as work, hinder the kind of change that Hilary just spoke about? And that was the main topic of the feminist ecological economics session. And was that the main topic on Tuesday? So do any of you have anything to say about that?
It's true. Very true.
Yeah, agreed.
So do you think, yeah, so you think it does hinder?
Hilary?
Hilary had to leave because her phone ran out of battery. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Mario? Sorry, it looks like you've got a hand up on Zoom, but that might have just been your hand up from last time, but I'm putting you on the spot. Mario?
Well, same answer. I mean, it's true. I mean, yes, as far as I know, the unions that I'm dealing with are usually dominated by male. Yes, that's true.
So, and do you believe that this hinders the kind of work and the kind of change that Hilary was talking about? And if you do think it hinders that change, what do you think can be done about it? That's a question to all of you, not just you, Mario.
It's just not a problem of gender. Gender representation is also a problem of diversity. And I can talk about unions in Spain and Italy. I spent many times in the UK, but I was not very active in union movements. My experience in Italy and in Spain is that the diversity is low. For example, I live in Galicia, and there is a local union that is very active. It's a little bit different, and it's very strong on the territory. But still, yes, the boards are dominated by male, and there is no diversity in terms of racial diversity or cultural diversity is low. How much this influences their agenda? Well, I think this. I'm not in the position to make a bold statement about that, but of course, lack of diversity it's definitely influences their agenda.
You're on mute, Phil.
Yeah, the quote that I used from Mike Cooley at the end of my remarks is preceded by this about women in industry. And he's saying that right on somewhere in the corporate plan, we make a major point that we hope to see more women in science and technology. We looked at one of the leading computer journals over 18 months, and 82% of the adverts showed that one person with equipment showed a young Dolly Bird type person, the male image of what a woman should be like. In other words, the idea that women are playthings that you have around to sell equipment. We say in the corporate plan that if only more women would come into science and technology, not as imitation men or honorary males, because equality can never mean sameness, but to point out that our Western science and technology is dominated by the predominantly male value system, the value system of the white male capitalist warrior hero. It will be an incredible philosophical contribution if we inject into science and technology the so-called female attributes of intuition, subjectivity, and humanity. That was what Mike had to say on a similar subject.
I've got a comment from Stephania as well, saying ITUC has a woman secretary general. So have other big union confederations. Clearly putting a woman on top doesn't change things much. Perhaps what would help is to stop thinking of care as a women's issue. Yeah, I absolutely agree that care isn't just a women's issue. And I think that, yeah, care and the unequal distribution of unpaid care work is one of the main things that is keeping women out of science and technology, as Mike's talking about.
Can I just say that I've already told you I'm an old chap, and as a consequence, I'm not that far away from needing care workers. So it's not just a woman's issue, believe you me. But it is true that the vast majority of care workers are women. But the fact that they're not valued is really disgusting. But the thing about the one woman in the ITUC's general secretary, yeah, I know. You can find the odd woman here, there, and everywhere, but that's not the issue. I mean, the issue is it's dominated by white males. And whilst you might have a woman as a general secretary, she's still a slave of the male domination or the male value, because that's how she got to be the general secretary. If she didn't have had those values, Margaret Thatcher was a prime minister. Now, that did a lot of good for workers, I must admit. Did it or did it not? You should know the answer to that. So by identifying a woman, you're not identifying women rising. Let's be honest about it. In 1970, Barbara Castle brought in the Equal Pay Act, 1970. And 50 years later, they're still fighting for equal pay. I mean, what does that say? So let's, I mean, Barbara Castle was a woman. Barbara Castle was one of my heroes because she was the one that brought in pensions by legislation, and British pensioners became very, very well off as a consequence of that. Margaret Thatcher got rid of that legislation, and Tony Blair, as a Labour government, did nothing to reinstate it. As a consequence, there could still be a lot of poverty in old age, not because of Barbara Castle, but because of Margaret Thatcher and of Tony Blair. You will appreciate that my short-term memory is letting me down a lot here. Anyway, That's all I have to say about that at the moment.
Thank you so much. It's 5:02 now, so I would like to just ask all the speakers to just, if they've got any final comments, to just say them now or forever hold your peace.
Well, my final comment is an advert, really. What I'd like to bring to everyone's attention is that if you really want a more comprehensive view of the Combine and the corporate plan, then I recommend you read the book by Hilary Wainwright and Dave Elliott, The Lucas Plan, A New Trade Unionism in the Making, published by Allison and Busby, and you'll get all you need about the corporate plan and the Lucas Aerospace Shop Stewards Combine. That's my final say.
Thanks, Mick. Phil? You're on mute.
It's just some stuff related to COVID and the new normal, really. There's a lot of stuff I've been reading recently about whether we want a return to the old normal with all its problems of pollution and traffic and so on, or whether we want to get what's best out of a new normal. Because I think a lot of people feel now, if we could just turn the clock back and have things how they were, then that would be a really good thing. But then you've still got the problems of global warming, which I think have been eclipsed by COVID. There was a woman speaking from the World Health Organization a few months ago, and she was addressing the question of, would there be a son of COVID? And she said, the answer to that question is not if there will be one. The answer to that question is when there will be one. The other thing that got pushed on the back burner is that research into antibiotics, which are losing their effectiveness by the minute, has reduced because of various factors, cost of development, and also the length of the patent. So we've still got, so with antibiotics, son of COVID, climate change, the future for our kids is not looking very rosy. And sorry to end on a depressing note, because usually I actually end with a bit of humour. Returning to the old normal would be good in the short term, but terrible in the long term. And I think that's where the focus has really got to be, what the shape of the new normal is going to look like.
Well, hopefully Mario can end on a joke. Go on, Mario, have you got any final thoughts?
Oh, I have a very positive message a very positive call to make. I think that's, I mean, Lucas' plan is great. I was very happy to listen to them from the original person that were involved. I think that now we need to make an effort in terms of communication, because if you ask around Lucas' plan, nobody really knows. I know that there is a lot of people, especially young people like me, like most of the people that are listening now. They have a lot of energy, and they are just looking for alternative messages. I think that we have to make an effort, also in the factories, in the old style, like communicating this stuff in the factories, try to create bridges between academia or a forum like the Growth Movements and the workers, like in the 70s in Italy, for example. This was very common. We need to make an effort in communication, because especially I'm talking from the degrowth community, our communication was not always very efficient. Sometimes the message that we can communicate is a negative message, reduce, come back to a past, an ideal past that doesn't exist. I think that people like the Lucas Plan, or example like the Lucas Plan, can have a very positive and optimistic message, despite the fact that was a failure, in this sense. So I think that there are a lot of people like us that are willing to listen to this kind of message, and we have to invest more in communication.
I couldn't agree more with you, Mario. I completely agree. Well, I just want to thank you all. It's been an absolutely amazing discussion. I've learned a lot and been really inspired. So thank you all for taking the time to join us.